Welcome to the very best part of my broadcast week. You know, I've been saying that for 7 years. I always mean it. I especially mean it this week because I'm in the presence of musical royalty, point one. Point two, of course, all podcasts like to cross-pollinate. One podcast brings attention to another because we love this space. We love the flexibility, what you can do with it. So, point one, musical royalty, Bob Crawford, bassist for the Avett Brothers, and creator of a spectacular podcast called Founding Son about John Quincy Adams. We're at the Smith. Been here before, haven't been here in a while. It's breakfast time. We'll have that meal here in due course. Bob Crawford, great to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So first, I just want to help my audience understand, natural question, wait a minute. You're a bass player for a world-famous band. That's a job, a full-time job, an extra full-time job. What's up with the podcast and the history obsession?
As long as I can remember, Major, I have been obsessed with American history.
Okay.
I credit my mother. I grew up in South Jersey, and we had a few historical sites there, historic Smithville and Batstow, which was an iron ore mill, which actually I came to learn Nathaniel Greene owned a stake in that at one point. But for some reason, you know, you would take these family trips, you know, and I'm 52, so this is the 70s, and you go to the rest stop, and there's all these pamphlets for historic sites. I would always collect them, and I would, like, lay them out on the floor and just stare at them and just wonder what happened in these places. And then I got into high school, and I was not a good student at all. But my first semester, I took an elective. Half the year was the history of New Jersey.
Okay.
Second half of the year was the intro to civics. And I just knew the answers. It got to the point where the teacher would be like, does someone other than Bob can tell me this? And we took a trip one day, second half of the year, to the New Jersey State Legislature. And I was just walking around, you know, the Capitol thinking, people do this for a living.
Yes.
Like, I'm in school every day. People, they come here and they do this.
Right.
And just ever since then, it just really grabbed me. It grabbed me.
And to be clear, touring by whatever mode of transportation, typically by bus or van, creates a lot of open space for reading.
Yeah, right. Like, being a tour musician, stereotypically, it's like choose your own self-destruction. And for me, you know...
Lots of choices.
Yeah, and we had... You know, the group of guys that I'm with, we had very little of that. The mistakes we made them a long time ago when no one was looking. Right. And it was more
helpful
about...
to do that.
Yes.
That way. That's
and
a
it
good
was
chronology of things.
limited.
Yeah.
But for me, it was like 2004, war in Iraq, Abu Ghraib, war's not going well. David McCullough is on every, you know, Face the Nation, Meet the Press, PBS, whatever it is, and he's talking about his books, you know, John Adams and 1776, and it just lit a little spark in me. And hearing him, the way he spoke about history, and I started reading his books, and from there it was Sean Wilentz, The Rise of American Democracy, Jefferson to Lincoln. And if later you ask me what's my favorite book of all time, I'll just,
Sean Wilentz's
spoiler
book,
alert.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
And that really started me on this road.
Because as the New York Times said in reviewing Founding Son, and I will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, Founding Son is the Hamilton of John Quincy Adams podcasts. I'll just say that right now. This period of time in American history, for most Americans, is kind of fuzzy. It's like revolution, then there was the Civil War. Huh? What happened in between? A lot happened in between. Yeah. And as Founding Son taught me, I had a sense of this, but I learned it so much better. It is hard to find someone more central to that period of time and what happened and why than John Quincy Adams.
He is the indispensable man. He is the most, I argue, he's one of the most important American politicians of the 19th century because he was a failed one-term president who, rather than go home and write his memoir, you know, he goes home, he's depressed, and he's asked to run for Congress. And he does, and he serves 17 years in Congress. And while he's in Congress, he pulls the issue of slavery from the shadows, from something that no one wanted to talk about in Congress because it could only it could only tear apart our nation if we discuss this.
Right.
Here, he pulls it into the center of the House of Representatives and makes it the issue of his time.
And let's think about this in broad swaths first. John Quincy Adams observed as a child the Battle of Bunker Hill, and he served with Abraham Lincoln in the House of Representatives. That, ladies and gentlemen, is an arc of history.
That was my pitch. Right. So iHeart, I was like, and
to iHeart Radio. Hey, how about this?
Hey,
I got a guy.
I mean, and it was a one-line pitch.
That's elevator.
And in fact, Washington appoints him to his first diplomatic post, and he serves with Abraham Lincoln. So if I go out here on F Street and I, pull
in
somebody
Washington, D.C., right?
here in Washington, D.C., outside maybe Ford's Theater, and I say, hey, I want you to think about George Washington for a minute. You're going to get this time period in your head. Dress, clothes, political aesthetic. If I say now, think about Abraham Lincoln, you're going to get a different vibe.
Right.
Altogether. What if I tell you John Quincy Adams served with both of those guys? That should blow your mind.
Exactly. And I want to go back to one thing you said because I think it is so helpful to contextualize. Failed one-term president, the first of our nation's history, meaning you were just terrible at this job. It was a kind of new job still, chief executive of this new country, and you were bad at it. And he was embittered, a little bit, depressed, and had a set of choices. And his range of choices did not include going to the House, which, though Congress was positionally more important than the presidency as this country was developing in its earliest stages, one member of the House, that's not the capper of a presidency. It isn't.
Right.
But it became a springboard for him to get more involved and to do things he was unable to accomplish or even imagine as president.
His wife, and at the time, his son and his wife were like, you can't do this. A president can't go into the House.
Right. What a step down.
That is a step down. And your father was John Adams, and
right.
and but for him, I think it was about redemption, and I think it was about, and Sean Woodland says this in the series, a little bit about revenge, and just to kind of show people that John Quincy Adams kept a diary from the 1780s until when he died in 1848.
Where did he die, by the way? Let my audience know that.
Well, he died at this beautiful building here in Washington, D.C. called the Capitol.
Yes.
He dies in the Capitol.
With his boots on, folks.
He died with his boots on.
At his desk.
Yes. He died at his desk, probably from an aneurysm. He had a stroke. And he kind of, he was in and out of consciousness. He falls on the floor.
Of the House.
At the time, and I got to see this recently. The couch that he dies on is still there. But there were these couches surrounding the floor of the House, and they bring over a couch, and they put him on the couch, and they put him into I guess it was the Speaker's chamber at the time. Now I think it's the Congressional Women's Powder Room, or it's a room for women congressional representatives. And he essentially lay in state. He was alive, but he was in and out of consciousness. And, all of his enemies and all of his friends came and wept by his side. Henry Clay, who he plays a big role in his life and in the John Quincy Adams story and in Founding Son. He held his hand and cried. And it was for a man who witnesses the Battle of Bunker Hill at the age of 8 years old, and then dies in the Capitol.
In the Capitol.
John Quincy Adams was our nation's greatest public servant.
On that, hold the thought. We're going to go to break. Bob Crawford from the Avett Brothers, bassist and creator of Founding Son, the podcast. We'll be back with him in just 1 second. Stay tuned.
In 1824, if you were Secretary of State, that was the president in waiting.
Welcome back. We're at the Smith. Breakfast is en route. Bob Crawford, our special guest, bassist for the Avett Brothers, creator of Founding Son, the podcast. We have a couple of producers who work long and hard on the show all the time, Arden Fari, Jamie Benson, but we have a co-producer this week, Doug High, introduced me to Bob Crawford. We know him as, Hey, Doug High. Doug is with us. Thank you, Doug, for putting this together, at least at the margins.
If you turn on any television news network at any hour
Doug's likely to
of the
be there.
day, Doug is on one of them.
Hardest working person in punditry.
That's right.
So, I'm going to mention some names
Okay.
who intersect with John Quincy Adams. Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson, complicated man.
Mm-hmm.
And our expert in the series, Lindsay Stravinsky, the great presidential historian, Lindsay Stravinsky, she says, we ask her, "What do you know a word to describe Andrew Jackson?" And she says, "Well, not a very nice one." I'm a little different on Jackson. He did horrible things, horrible things to Native Americans and African Americans. Terrible man. But at the end,
an important political figure in this transition in our country as westward and southern expansion was continuing, populism and the creation of party.
Yes.
Foundational creation of party and how it collided with John Quincy Adams.
Well, he's the original populist hero here.
Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, Andrew Jackson is. And the thing about Jackson is there was something that came up called nullification. And it was, get this, to our 21st century ears, a state doesn't like a federal rule. Okay, we're just not going to abide by it.
Right.
And that's what South Carolina tried to do.
The issue was tariffs.
The issue was tariffs, and guess who the head of the charge against paying the South Carolina paying the tariff? It was John C. Calhoun from South Carolina, who happens to be the vice president under Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams. But so Jackson faces down this states' rights. This states' rights issue in South Carolina, and he is ready to bring the full force of the American military against the state of South Carolina.
On behalf of the Union.
On behalf of the Union.
Yep.
So here you have a bad guy who does the right thing.
Yep.
At the right time.
And talk to me about the corrupt bargain and how that foreshadowed Jackson's rise, maybe accelerated it more than anything else, and how it intersects with JQA, John Quincy Adams.
Henry Clay. So Clay is the Speaker of the House. And as James Traub, another great expert we have in our series, says, we would love him. He was a drinker. He was a carouser. He was a gambler. He was the world's most fascinating man. John Quincy Adams, he's the opposite of John Quincy Adams, who is just very prudish and very buttoned up and
very New England.
Very New England and
flinty.
He was a curmudgeon, right? Always in a bad mood. And but
Clay's a raconteur.
He's a raconteur, and he wants to be president. He
badly,
is so bad. And it's 1824 election, and James Monroe has been the president. And this is what we call, it's faux, but we call it the era of good feelings.
Right.
There's one party. There's no longer this.
Everyone gets along.
We all get along. We're all on the same team. It's cool. It's great.
America,
So,
go.
I'll try to be so brief because I can really,
yes.
I can ramble here. But you got a four-way battle for the presidency.
Right.
You got William Crawford, no relation, from Georgia. He's the Secretary of the Treasury.
Right.
You have John Quincy Adams, Secretary of State, perhaps our greatest Secretary of State.
Yeah.
You have Henry Clay, and you have Andrew Jackson.
And Andrew Jackson, those are the big four.
Right. Calhoun wants to get in. He's like, no one else is running for vice president. I'll just take that and
I'll
bide my
slide
time.
in.
I'll do my thing. So no one wins a plurality of the no one wins a majority of the votes.
So it's a contested election decided by the House.
So you're saying that it's a contested election in 1824, 200 years ago?
Yeah.
We have a contest, and it goes to the House of Representatives.
Right.
The top three now vie for election in the House. Each delegation gets one vote.
Yep.
Okay. So Henry Clay is the fourth. So he's not going to be in. But this makes him an incredibly powerful man.
Kingmaker. Well, president maker.
President maker. He hates hates Andrew Jackson with a passion, bitterly, and this goes back to the War of after the War of 1812 and some things that and we won't get into all this.
Right.
This would be a rabbit hole for me. So he's not going to vote for Andrew Jackson.
Right.
He's not going to lobby for Andrew Jackson.
Nope.
William Crawford is old, and he just had a stroke.
Right.
And he is pretty debilitated.
Kind of
but
out of it.
He's still in the race. No one thinks he would survive a term.
Anyway.
Apparently, he has trouble speaking, and he's just not doing well. So,
And if all these names, nobody knows the machinery of this process, a contested election, better than Clay.
Better than Clay, yes.
So he goes to work.
So he goes to work, and he knows Adams is the best.
From his vantage point.
Best guy for the job. They agree on the American system,
Right.
which is basically infrastructure, that the federal government will dole out money to the states for infrastructure projects that will bind the union together.
Right.
People in the North and the West were all for this. People in the South, people like Andrew Jackson, they weren't. Because if you have better infrastructure,
Better roads.
that makes it easier for your property
To move.
to escape from you. Also, the whole thing about states' rights, it was very prevalent then. You know,
Completely.
they wanted the federal government to do the bare minimum.
Right.
Right. So Clay goes about lobbying for John Quincy Adams to be president. And they have a few personal meetings. Most of the lobbying's done through third parties. But in 1824, if you were Secretary of State,
Yep.
that was the president in waiting.
Yep. Springboard.
You know, springboard. You have Madison was a Secretary of State. At one point, Jefferson was a Secretary of State. Monroe was a Secretary of State. You know, you got, 5 presidents at this point.
That's how you become president.
That's how you become president.
Right.
So Clay is able to turn a couple of those pancakes look great.
And as promised, breakfast has arrived.
And this is the chicken sausage and the biscuit.
There you go. Excellent.
And,
well done. Well played.
Thank you. And so Clay managed to turn a couple delegations to vote for Adams. Delegations like Kentucky, his home state, which they wanted Jackson.
Yep.
He went against their wishes to make that vote happen for Adams. So Adams wins the presidency
In a
corrupt
bargain.
bargain. It was a stolen election, right? Never heard of these things
Never.
before. But there was a stolen election, so to speak. And then, of course, the Jackson press immediately.
And that's worth pointing out very briefly. Press was partisan. Or
all press
yes.
was partisan.
Aligned. It had an agenda.
If Major was running for office, he would call Doug and say, "Hey, Doug, I got a couple $100. Can you go set up a newspaper for me?"
Right.
And that's how
And
it
print
works.
exactly what I want.
And print and just the party's message.
Right.
Right. So
So the Jacksonians go nuts.
that's it. It's a stolen election.
Right.
But why is it a stolen election? It's a what do they call this? A quid pro quo. Quid pro quo, because Adams becomes president. He appoints Henry Clay
As what?
his Secretary of State. The
What? The
fix is
springboard to the
in.
presidency?
The fix is in, and that was it. And so the campaign for 1828 starts immediately, and there's a guy, a New York senator by the name of Martin Van Buren, who becomes a Jacksonian and begins to put together a New York, Virginia, North-South coalition to back the populist hero Andrew Jackson, who
And-
had the presidency stolen from him.
And to block everything that John Quincy Adams would try to accomplish as president, sowing the seeds for that failed presidency status we referred to in segment 1. That is the voice of Bob Crawford, bassist for the Avett Brothers and creator of Founding Son podcast. We're at the Smith. Breakfast has arrived. Segment 3 coming your way. Just 1 second.
Because Adams kept this copious journal, his voice is so available to us.
Welcome back. Bob Crawford is our guest. The Smith is our host restaurant. Happy to be here. Demolished my pancakes in, well, like about 45 seconds, so they're very, very good. Founding Son is the name of the podcast. Before we get into more of the details, you have some special voices who assisted you, not just the historians and scholars you've mentioned, but some other pretty cool folk. Who are they?
Patrick Warburton.
Probably heard of him.
Yeah, Putty from Seinfeld. The Tick. A lot of great roles. Amazing voices. I mean, he's in like if you turn your TV, you see Doug High. In a minute, you're going to see Patrick in a commercial. Mm-hmm. Amazing guy. So my daughter is a St. Jude patient. St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. Mm-hmm. Pediatric cancer patient. She's been a patient for 11 years.
Wow.
And Patrick and his wife are incredible supporters of St. Jude, and that's how I got to meet Patrick.
Okay.
Great guy, really compassionate. We'd love to have him at this table. He's just a good human being. Nick Offerman.
Probably heard of him.
Patrick plays John Quincy Adams.
Yep.
Nick Offerman, I don't know why he agreed to do it, but I'm so glad that he did. And I think he loves history. He's really passionate about it. So he voices Andrew Jackson. Mm-hmm. He was like the only choice. Like who do you think when we had this idea, we were kind of down the road of producing this, and it was like because Adams kept this copious journal, his voice is so available to us. And I started pulling these quotes and putting them in the script, and I'm thinking we need actors to read these actual quotes to bring these people to life. You know, when the Avett Brothers make a set list, you know, you're gonna we do it like we're gonna come out, hit you with full band, 7 people on stage, and then at some point it's gonna be 3 of us,
right?
And it's gonna be a guy with a guitar, and it's gonna be a woman playing a fiddle and singing a song, and you know, all these different combinations to create an hour of 2 hours of a dynamic experience. Same thing when you're trying to bring 19th century history to life, you need to make it dynamic. So we had this idea to have actors portray these figures. And so Patrick is John Quincy Adams. Nick is Andrew Jackson. Scott Avett, if you're a friend of the band, he plays Charles Francis Adams.
No, but I'd like to become one.
Charles Francis Adams. And also Theodore Weld, who is one of my favorite abolitionists. Michael Smerconish is William Henry Harrison.
Okay.
John King from CNN.
I've heard of him.
Does he reads a John Adams quote. Mm-hmm. So and the great Gray Delisle, who has been Daphne on Scooby-Doo for decades.
Great.
She is Louisa Catherine Adams, John Quincy's wife. So yeah, a lot of great actors donated their time.
Talk to me about a phrase that comes up with some frequency in Founding Son, slaveocracy.
I believe this was coined by John Quincy Adams, and it was to describe the slave caucus in Congress, essentially, and which was the whole everybody from the South,
right.
Whig and Democrat at the time, and then you had their northern allies, you know, Northerners who they're okay with slavery. Mm-hmm. We're okay with this,
right?
And so Adams begins to.
We sort of think, the North was always against slavery. Not true.
Well, no, not at all true. No, and the North benefited from slavery. Manufacturing in Massachusetts, of course, they were creating the clothes the slaves wear and the implements they used to work the fields. Yeah, no, the North they didn't want slavery to go away. Major, if we're sitting here in 1837, we cannot fathom in our brains that slavery will ever go away. It is
that ingrained.
It is the economy of the United States.
The economy, the culture, the mindset.
Everything.
Embedded into religion.
Yes, embedded in religion. Talk about the culture. There were slave economic journals. Like, you know, the slave owners, they weren't these backwoods yokels, right? They were Morgan Stanley and JP. They were
how to run a proper plantation, how to monetize, how to obtain loans and collateralize, all of it.
And Adams
systematized.
Part of, you know, you talk about Puritan work ethic. part of Adams' disdain for slavery, other than it being against God, morally reprehensible, was also that they did this to create leisure for themselves. They had the slave labor to create, and he tells Tocqueville. Tocqueville comes from France to the United States. He writes this amazing book, Democracy in America. He has dinner one night with Adams and asks him about slavery, and Adams says because they're lazy and they want to create a leisure culture, and because they have so much time on their hands, they duel and they do the horse races, and it's just a backwards element that was that had a philosophy and an intellect and an ideology and an intelligence behind it. And Adams absolutely finds it reprehensible, but he doesn't think Congress has anything that they can do about it because it's in the Constitution.
Implied in the Constitution.
The three-fifths clause.
Yes. Doesn't say slavery in the Constitution, but it's implied. And abolitionists begin to change that. And again, we think of abolitionists simply as, well, there was a huge faction. It wasn't huge. It was very small. It was a grinding, bit-by-bit effort, oftentimes in Congress, systematically thwarted by the slaveocracy.
They were radicals.
The abolitionists.
They were the fringe. They were. If you're in Philadelphia, and the abolitionists come to town, you're protesting them. Like Massachusetts, all these places that weren't conducive for slavery or particularly supportive of slavery, they didn't like the abolitionists either.
They were agitators.
They were looking to divide the country, to destroy the country. And
didn't have its best interests at heart.
Did not have its best interest. What would immediate emancipation do to this nation? And so, but they were protected, freedom of speech.
Right.
And they begin this campaign to send petitions to the Congress. And they knew that the Congress didn't believe they had jurisdiction over slavery in the states, but they felt like they had jurisdiction over slavery in Washington, D.C., where we're sitting today.
Yes.
This was federally controlled territory. Therefore, it's under the purview of the Congress of the United States.
That could be debated.
That could be debated.
Right.
And so they start to send these petitions to Congress. They flood Congress with these petitions. They arrive by the wagon load. One report I read, a guy walking down the hallway of the Capitol, and they're stacked up, waist high on both sides. I mean, millions would arrive by the end of the 1830s to Congress. And back in those days, the congressional session begins, and every Monday, every day for the first 2 weeks, the first hour is dedicated to the reading of petitions. Because the First Amendment says that citizens have the right to petition the government
for redress of grievances.
Exactly. And so this was literally it. Like, if Major's like, I got potholes in my town, or, I think the mayor's crooked, whatever it is, he sends a petition in. His congressman gets up and says, I have a petition here from Major Garrett, blah, 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 and he believes, blah, 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 and please pass it, and this will go, I commend it to the committee on this, or the committee on that, or this and that. So Adams, his first day in 1831 in the House, he gets up and reads 15 of these. And he says, he reads them and says, I don't agree with what they're wanting to do here. I don't agree with what's possible. But, please submit this for the record.
Submit this for the record.
And it's no big deal.
And I'm going to hold you right there, because that's a pregnant pause in this dramatic story. Think in your minds, ladies and gentlemen, hallways in the Capitol up to your waist on both sides with petitions about the central issue of slavery, which, though it wasn't a central issue at the time, very much at the margins. Very radical idea. That radical idea and what Quincy Adams did with it when we come back, segment 4 of The Takeout with Bob Crawford in just 1 second.
And he says, am I gagged? Am I gagged? And he was. He was gagged. That is the gag rule.
Welcome back. So happy to be joined by Bob Crawford, bassist for the Avett Brothers, creator of Founding Son, the podcast, which I cannot recommend too strongly. So we had that pregnant pause, the petitions,
Yeah.
John Quincy Adams carried away.
Yeah, so in the mid-1830s, these petitions start to come more and more and more and more. And Southerners start to get, like, it's starting to bug them. Mm-hmm. They're like, okay, we've had it with this. So there becomes these battles with abolitionists in Congress, like, men from Vermont or Massachusetts. John Quincy, he tries to kind of stay out of it. He's reading them and this and that. But they begin to threaten to table these before, not even allow them to be read.
Right.
And Adams even at one point says, why don't you just read them and then table them? Then it's kind of like, well, people get to have their voice heard, but you're not going to do anything with them, right? But Northerners want a select committee. There's a committee for Washington, D.C. They think they should all go there.
Right.
And Southerners say, no, we need to stop them.
Right.
And
Not only do we not want a committee, they basically come around to say, we don't even want them read.
we don't want them read. We're not going to accept them. And so that's where Adams kind of turns. So in 1836, because Adams thinks, you cut off the right to petition, you're cutting off freedom of speech.
Right.
What's next? Freedom of religion.
Right.
Freedom of the press. You're not messing with slavery. Now you're messing with the Constitution itself, the
Exactly.
very governing document of
In
this
defense
nation.
of slavery.
In defense of
To
slavery.
protect it.
Right.
To protect it from scrutiny and debate.
Right. Slavery is very much, at this point, it's think about you take yourself to 1836. You've had Virginian, Washington, you have Adams, then you have Jefferson, Monroe, Madison, Jackson. Most of the presidents of the United States have been slave owners.
Correct.
Most of the Secretary of States, the Secretaries of War, Secretaries of the Treasury. I mean, the United States really is a slave power run nation.
And
at
one
this
quick
point.
fact, from 1803 to 1821, 8 states entered the Union. That changes not only the geography, but the politics, and this great question. How will this expansionist nation deal with this issue?
Right. So John Henry Hammond, a congressman from South Carolina, he puts forward a motion to deny these petitions. Pinckney, another congressman from South Carolina, but a supporter of Martin Van Buren, the New Yorker who is Jackson's heir apparent in the 1836 election, says, why don't we set up a committee to discuss this issue? So they discuss the issue. This is 1836, May of 1836. They come up with 3 ideas, right, or 3 proposals. The third one is to table them without reading them, to just deny these petitions. And that is the trigger moment for Adams to just say, he gets up and he tries to speak against the vote when they're voting on this, and they won't. The chair, who is the secretary, or the Speaker of the House is James K. Polk, who will
One day become president.
in 8 years will be president. 8 years will be president. Will not recognize him, and he says, "Am I gagged? Am I gagged?" And he was gagged. That is the gag rule. From that point on until 1844 or 1843, you cannot mention slavery on the floor of the House of Representatives. But Adams, being Adams,
Yes.
knowing the rules of order better than anyone else in the Congress, finds ways to sneak it in
Yep.
while debating other issues. I call it political jujitsu.
Yep.
And
Find a way. Find a way.
He finds a way, and he keeps working at it, and is threatened with censure. At one point, he is being censured. This is a whole. We can get into it if you want, but that moment in May of 1836, the gag rule. That is the moment Adams turns from being reviled about slavery to being not an abolitionist, but unabashedly anti-slavery.
Exactly. And look, life is writ through with father issues. History is writ through with father issues.
Yes.
Lyrics to songs are writ through with father issues. Let's be candid, ladies and gentlemen. The greatest father issue this country ever had was slavery.
Yeah.
Because it was handed down to us by the founding fathers.
Sure.
This steaming pile of manure
Yes.
was handed off to every son and daughter by the founding fathers.
Yeah, they didn't want to deal with it.
They didn't want to deal with it.
They just wanted to.
And then it created a mentality of we can't deal with it, because if we deal with it, we'll destroy ourselves. So we
That's
can't
right.
deal with it.
Right.
And it became a didacticism. You can't touch it, because if you touch it, you'll destroy us. And you don't want to destroy us, do you? So it became a self-fulfilling, well, we can't do anything about this thing. It was handed down. And JQA, John Quincy Adams, said no.
Yeah.
And lots of others.
But he agreed with that for a long time.
For a while, yes.
He knew. He would write during the debate over the Missouri Compromise, he wrote in his diary, confessed, just to his diary, that this will lead to civil war. At one point, this is going to lead to civil war.
Right.
He saw this coming from decades away. He saw it coming.
So let's bring this to the current times in a slightly unexpected way. Jimmy Carter is aged. He's in hospice care. He may leave us at some point in the not-too-distant future, and there will be I believe, well-intentioned rush at that moment to describe his ex-presidency as the best in American history. Until I listened to this podcast, I probably would have been in that general category. I don't think I would have been definitive on it, but I'd have been, yeah, that sounds about right. I think you would argue, no, he would be the second best
I
ex-presidency.
personally would, and it's funny because I wrote an unpublished op-ed comparing Adams and Carter. I think there's a lot there to compare. I would argue that both Carter and Adams were able to accomplish more outside of the presidency than they would have accomplished with a second term. And I absolutely believe that Adams serving 17 years in the House of Representatives and what he was able to accomplish, bringing slavery to the front of the, into the center of the House, like he did in the battle he won over the gag rule and defeating his own censure and defending the Amistad captives before the Supreme Court. All of the things he did to hand off this battle to Lincoln's generation.
Right.
He held the line. The man in the gap. I think that he makes him the greatest ex-presidency we've seen. And man, wouldn't it be great to have a Texas Senator George W. Bush or Congressman Barack Obama? Or, hey, wouldn't Trump, for as much as he is who he is, he would thrive in the House. He belongs in the House of Representatives.
On that discordant note, I'm going to just say, no thanks. Bob Crawford, our special guest. Stay tuned for the Takeout Outtake Especial. Again, Bob Crawford's podcast, Founding Son. Listen to it. You will love it and learn from it. Stay tuned for the Takeout Outtake Especial, folks.
International slave trade was banned in 1808, but it was still going on.
Welcome to your Takeout Outtake Especial. Our thanks to the Smith. Wonderful breakfast here. Bob Crawford, our special guest, bassist for the remarkable band, the Avett Brothers, and creator of the podcast, Founding Son. Amistad. That is a huge word in the history of John Quincy Adams, the subject of Founding Son. Talk to me about it.
Yeah, that's episode 5 if you're listening to the series. And
listen to all 6 people.
It was I feel like explaining the background of the international slave trade was banned in 1808, but it was still going on.
Yep.
Right. It was what would you call it? Like piracy almost. But so there were these slaves that were stolen from Africa, what we today Sierra Leone, and it was a Spanish slave traders who obtained them, and they took them to Cuba, and it was what you would call slave laundering, where you.
right.
You know, and you take them to one part
Where
of
were
Cuba.
they from? Who owned them?
Exactly.
What was the
doctored
means?
the paperwork.
Yes,
Right. You know, this is what was done. So they're going from one part of Cuba to another part of Cuba as part of this process, and there's a mutiny on board. And the slaves kill the captain and the cook. And
An uprising.
Is an uprising. And one of the actual Spanish traders, they force him to sail the ship back to Africa. But he doesn't do it. It's like Montero and Ruiz are the two slave traders. Cinque is the leader of the
uprising
of the captives.
Yes.
And the Mendi tribe. So they, in the daytime, he would go west to Africa, east to Africa. At night, he would go north to America, hoping to get caught, to be seen off the coast of the United States. And eventually he is. And a Coast Guard, what we would think of today as a Coast Guard cutter, spies them. And there's all these satins and silks on the ship, and the Mendi are wearing these like bright colored clothes, and eventually they run out of water and they're going on shore getting water. So it's just kind of a suspicious vessel, kind of like wandering around off the coast of Long Island. And so they're captured, and then they get into the United States court system.
Right.
And the guy who captures them, Lieutenant Gidney, he wants money. You know, I guess there's the custom of the sea with the you know, if you find it, you can keep it.
Right.
It's yours. So there's Van Buren's running for re-election. It's like 1840. Can we just give it back to Spain?
This is an annoyance. Enter John Quincy Adams.
Can we just, So long story short, they go through the court. They win, the Mendi win every court case. The Van Buren administration appeals, and it goes to the Supreme Court of the United States. Roger Sherman Baldwin, who is played by Ken Burns on the Founding Son series, he's good. He's a good lawyer. He comes from good stock. His grandfather signed the Declaration of Independence. I believe his grandson may start the ACLU. James Traub says this in our series. But he's not ready for prime time, right? He's not ready for the Supreme Court. So
call in John Quincy Adams.
Arthur Tappan, who's like big money abolitionist, New York mercantilist, goes to Adams and says, will you take this case? And Adams is like, how can I say no?
Right.
Of course, his son's like, Dad, don't do that. You don't get involved.
Right.
Do not do this. His son's trying to run for the state house in Massachusetts. He's like, Dad, you're killing me. You're killing me, Dad. But Adams takes the case, and he argues this amazing 8-hour, it's 2 4-hour monologues in defense of these captives.
Right.
And the Supreme Court was...
And the question was, can they be freed and go back to Africa?
Can they be free? Should they be free, man?
Right.
Should they be free?
And he wins.
And he wins. And he points to the and I think this is the old Senate chamber, is where the Supreme Court was.
Yeah.
And he points, there's a copy of the Declaration of Independence. In fact, as Secretary of State, he ordered those copies to be made. And he points to it, and he says, if we believe in this document, these men are free.
Right.
And it's weird because he gives 4-hour defense. They end for the day. A Supreme Court justice dies. That night, they take a 2-week break. They come back. He does another
4 hours.
4-hour speech. He finishes for the day, gathers his papers, goes upstairs to the house, takes a seat.
Goes back to work.
Goes back to work.
That's a full day, ladies and gentlemen.
And decisions came quicker.
Yeah.
And Justice Story, I believe, gave the majority opinion, and they ruled in favor of the Mendi.
There you go. We have 3 questions we ask every guest
Okay.
here. I need you to give me your answers. And the music one, you can run in any different direction. But most influential book in your life and why?
Rise of American Democracy, Jefferson to Lincoln.
By Sean Wilentz.
Yes.
All-time favorite movie?
All-time favorite movie, Casablanca or It's a Wonderful Life, probably It's a Wonderful Life.
There we go.
And I'm really beginning to love The Best Years of Our Lives.
A phenomenal
Incredible.
movie.
Yeah.
Very mature post-World War II movie, unfairly overlooked.
Yeah.
And music. If you're going to enjoy some music,
What day of the week is it? so here.
what artist or genre? Not Avett Brothers is it most likely to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love jazz. I love everything, and I go through phases, right? I go down rabbit holes, and so this summer, I've always loved Steely Dan, and so I've been listening to a lot of Steely Dan, which got me to Boz Scaggs.
Yep.
I love Boz Scaggs now. But then last week in the bunk after the show, I'm listening to Yes.
There you go.
I haven't listened to Yes since I was 15.
Rick Wakeman, ladies and gentlemen.
What am I doing?
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, I just love music, and I just get on these rabbit holes and I follow them down for a few days. I go somewhere else.
It has not been a long distance run around to sit with Bob Crawford, ladies and gentlemen. My pleasure to be with him. Founding son. Listen to it, love it. I know you will. Bob, it's been a pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
See you next week.
Having me.